about law, society, scholarship, and fandom. Welcome to Semantic Shenanigans.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Semantic Shenanigans, show number 15. Next month, our show will be Old Enough to Drive. As always, I am one of your hosts, Janet Gerstensiegel, and joining me from a partially flooded bunker somewhere in the Midwest is my co-host, the lovely Shanna Gilkison.
Who is old enough to drive.
But just barely.
Just barely, that's right. That's right. I don't know so much about flooded, although we got snowed on pretty good the other day, but it's trying to melt off, and there's no corn in sight yet, but give it time.
Yes, indeed. We had we didn't have anybody, canoeing in the street quite, but there was front page pictures of down power lines in Watertown, which is only 2 towns from where we are. Apparently, it's like one of them went down, and of course, it took all the rest of them with it. So ugly doings in some parts of the Northeast United States. That's
messed up.
Yeah, it was icky. We had power. We still have power. I don't know. We're very lucky. Not plastic. So.
So what's something?
Yeah. So what's shaking? What have you been doing?
So I don't think I talked about this when it happened, but one of my hobbies is freshwater aquariums, and currently I have 3 active aquariums going right now. And right after New Year's, let me put it this way: when you wake up and you go out into your living room, your day's not going to end well when it starts with "What's that smell?"
Ooh, okay.
And yeah, I had lost almost every single fish in one of my particular aquariums. I had a clown loach named Houdini, a Plecostomus named D.B. Cooper. I could find no evidence that I had even ever had those fish, so I'm imagining one of those died first and just kind of like poisoned the rest of the tank because like they were hiders. My 2 big, beautiful angelfish, Mulder and Scully, they were belly up in the top. I only had 1 lone surviving neon, which oddly was my oldest fish. So I ended up naming him Daryl after The Walking Dead because like
he just survives everything.
He survived Fishpocalypse, and everybody knows if you want to live, you stick with Daryl. You do what he says, right? So After letting the tank recover and just doing my best to keep Daryl alive for like about 6 weeks, I finally started putting fish in that aquarium. So there's some more tetras in there. So Daryl now has Rick, Michonne, Carol, and Carl to play with. And
this is Swimming Dead now.
It's the Swimming Dead, yeah. And then I have another clown loach that I haven't named yet. So anyway, that tank's recovering. My other 2 tanks are okay. But of course, now that I've got that tank settled, I've got the cat drama. My cat Squiggy was diagnosed as diabetic last week. Yeah, so he's on a special diet now, and he's not eating much. He's lost a lot of weight. So we have another follow-up appointment this coming week, and we're probably looking at one therapy for him. They're going to run his sugar again, so hopefully we can get his appetite back and get the poor little guy back into shape. That poor guy's been through a lot in the last year.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, but he's been getting lots of love and snuggles in the meantime. And fandom-wise, last night I had one of my obsessive jags where I just kind of jumped down an internet rabbit hole and played detective. There was a song on General Hospital that I heard like way back in 1982, and it's like one of those Listen, okay. So, you know how you hear a song and you get obsessed with it because you don't know the artist, you don't know the title, and you can't find out. And this was like back in 1982, so like I was just a youngster without the internet. So there was no way for me to find it. And every so often, ever since I've had internet access, every so often I would try to find out about the song, but even in the fandom sites, it's hard to go that far back and find anybody who knows. And I finally remembered the name of a temporary character who was involved with the storyline where I had heard this song. And so I ended up typing in General Hospital and this character's name, and darned if like full episodes pop up on YouTube.
Awesome.
And so like these full episodes, I mean, they were like broken up into like 2 or 3 parts per each episode because like YouTube is funky about that stuff. But I only had to go through 2 parts to find the song, and there was no information in the metadata, so I Shazammed that thing with my smartphone, and I found the song. So like this quest that's been going on for 35 years is finally solved.
Okay, we can all go home now.
We can all go home now. I win at detective.
Woohoo! So your next assignment is DB Cooper, and then after that is Jimmy Hoffa?
Yeah. Although I'm pretty sure Jimmy Hoffa is probably in the foundation of the Renaissance Center in Detroit.
I thought he was in the goalposts, underneath the goalposts at Giant Stadium.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
The two are not mutually exclusive.
Right? There could be parts of them in one and parts of them in the other. I mean, who knows?
This discussion's taking an interesting turn.
I've been watching a lot of CSI lately. I'm sorry.
Jimmy Hoffa found in several time zones now.
So what have you been doing?
Life is sort of revolving around writing, whether it's for my, writing stuff or if it's for work. So that's pretty much all I do all day long is write. And, which is fine. It's just, I'm in search of feedback these days, and that's sort of, few and far between. It's a little harder to get feedback, unfortunately. Because if things aren't going well, I'd like to change them, and if they are going well, then I want to, level up and start sending some of this stuff out to magazines and see if I can get it published. So last month I spent time doing things that kind of weren't writing in the writing sphere, things like editing and, trying to work with beta readers and, which means a lot of begging actually. And, some research and also trying to brainstorm a bit because this November for NaNoWriMo, I want to do the 3rd book in the Real Hub of the Universe trilogy. And right now it's tentatively called The Real Hope of the Universe. So I'm kind of trying to figure out what the hell I want to do with it, because this is the one that's going to wrap up the series. And, wrapping up the series is always kind of tricky because there's things that I see as loose ends that maybe a reader doesn't really give a damn about. So, I don't want to spend 3 chapters worrying about, okay, and then this one changed their name from Scott with 2 T's to Scott with 1 T. Now that's been fixed. Like nobody else cares. It's something of that level. And so I have to be careful to parse through this and find things that are meaningful, and also at the same time you say goodbye to this series, and that can be very hard to do. I have a tendency to have completion problems because I don't want to end it. I don't want to say goodbye. So figure out how to do that.
I've been through that with like pieces of fan fiction that I've worked on for a long time or something like that. Just write that last installment and you get the reader response and all that, but there's just this moment of, now what do I do?
Exactly. And although I do have another series actually in my head for something else that will take me back to a universe I had created originally in 2002. It's sort of this tripartite society. On Earth and the rest of the solar system is about 50 years, 100 years or so for now, where we've colonized the entire solar system. Anything we can possibly stick a flag on, we've done that. And we've done this with the help of friendly sentient aliens who are kind of sharing our society with us and with semi-sentient robots. But there's a nasty little underbelly there because, not everybody wants those orange freaks to come out and take our jobs kind of thing. And some of those semi-sentient robots have been, let's just say, reprogrammed to do things in the red light district.
Oh.
Yeah. But now I've got kind of a different idea of something else to do with this, which will be kind of a different, this is all very cop driven. So now the next thing is, I really like time travel, so I'm very time travel tropey, but I want to do this. I want to do time travel in a very different manner. And of course, the what do you do with time travel? There's almost always the storyline is somebody's changing things. You don't want them to change them. You gotta catch the bad guy, sort of thing. So that will probably end up being sort of the plot, but that the window dressing around it will be different. So, but I'm still sort of like very, very tentative. It's extremely foggy in my head.
So you're not there, kind of like, I know, we'll put it in a hot tub.
Pretty close. I'm actually it's going to be in a syringe.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, so it's going to be the newest, latest high for the extraordinarily rich among us is going back in time.
Wow. Okay, that's really intriguing, Janet.
Thank you. I hope I can live up to it. That's the thing. It's it's like, what do you do with this idea? This is a really good idea. No, now where? Now where do we go with it?
All right. Well, we probably shouldn't say any more about it because I don't want people to steal your idea.
All right. So do we want to move into the proper?
We can. Oh my god. So I'm so excited for this segment because number one, we're going to talk about Black Panther, which was so flippin' awesome. And if you haven't seen it, your first order of business is to get out there and go see this movie. Where I can't say enough about how much I love this movie so hard. But this also marks a show first in that a previous guest, Gabriel Cruz, who is a PhD candidate and colleague of mine at Bowling Green State University, he has the distinction of being our first return guest. He's been on the show before to talk about representation in the media, and as his expertise is in comics and representation, there is nobody I know who is so well suited to join us and talk about this film and what it means. So I'm just so excited. Gabe, thank you so much for joining us again.
Sure, I'm happy to do it, and thank you for having me back. It was a lot of fun the first time.
Awesome. Welcome back.
I'm glad you thought it was fun the first time. I don't know about this time, though. Just kidding. So before we get to Black Panther, tell us how your research is going.
Hope is a lie and only the darkness is real. That's most of where my research is right now. So, also, I'm immediately struck by the idea of 2.5 white people discussing Black Panther, but let's get about it.
We're just gonna go past that and move on. It's radio. There's you don't need to say.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, actually, as far as the research goes, things are going pretty well. I am slogging my way through a chapter featuring Luke Cage and Jean Grey and a shift in their aesthetics over time, which is painful because it means I have to read really old comics that were, one, the quality's kind of but two, just some really interesting ideas about what it means to be a black man or a white woman, written by people who were neither. So, that kind of fun.
Yeah, I always think that that's really interesting, the results that we get. when you have this person who is white and male and probably old, and writing about people who are none of these things. And I mean, it's one thing to like write about them, but it's another thing to like kind of like try to tell their stories for them. And I think that's like where a lot of people sort of forget that this might be a problem.
Yeah, especially because none of these old dudes thought that it was a problem that Xavier had it real bad for Jean Grey, and she was 16 and he was in his 30s when she first debuted. So yeah, stuff like that. But anyway, so talk about the movie.
Yeah, let's talk about the movie. So I was excited to find out online this morning that Black Panther has hit $500 million at the box office, which is really big.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Is that domestically?
I don't know. I think that's domestically. Let me just double check that. But yeah, so
I think that is domestically.
I think that is the domestic. Yeah, because I don't say. Panther shines brightly around the world with 897.7 million. So that's the worldwide figure, and domestic is 502.1 million.
Wow.
So I mean, aside from just being a really well-told story with interesting and compelling characters, the right amount of action. I'm just gonna put it out there. This is like one of the best constructed movies I've ever seen, and I'm not even one of those people who are like, oh yeah, superhero movies. Like I'm not. I love people who are Marvel junkies. I'm just not one myself. But as soon as this movie was over, like I just wanted to go again. It was so amazing. So aside from just being a really well constructed movie, I would like to posit the fact that, perhaps it's these issues of representation, the way race and gender both are handled in the film, are part of why it's doing so well. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, Janet, have you seen the film already?
I have not, because I actually never leave the house.
So with that said, we're going to spoil some things for Janet here, probably.
Go for it.
Sure.
It's fine.
But I feel like this is a movie that even if you know where things are going, you will still enjoy the full out of it. I mean, it's a great movie.
For sure.
Cool.
So let's think about this for a moment then. Is this? Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead with your idea.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, so one of the things I was impressed with about the movie from a representational and a narrative perspective is that in this movie, I think you see references to the sort of the historic stereotypes that have been used for African Americans in film. And so one of my favorite scholars to reference to, for anyone listening, is Donald Bogle, who has written quite a bit about African American film. And so one of the things he outlines is that you have 5 main stereotypes regarding African Americans, and most stereotypes after that are derivatives thereof. And so what I like about this movie is that I think you see each of those 5, and the 5 are the Tom, the Coon, the Mulatto, the Mammy, and the Buck, and that those are referenced. And then those characters are given such dimensionality and complexity that it breaks the stereotypes. So, for example, one example is let's go with the coon stereotype. And the coon stereotype is characterized by a certain irreverence for society, a reverence for power structures, a reverence for other people, that kind of thing. And so we see that in Shuri. Shuri, who is T'Challa, the primary character, his sister. She's irreverent towards everything. She has no real respect for tradition. She does things that she knows she shouldn't. She's a smart aleck. She's got jokes about everything. Just a really fun character. But she is also exceedingly intelligent. I mean, we're talking. I would put her up against Tony Stark any day. She is very motivated. She is very accomplished, and she takes a lot of pride in what she does. And so we see some characteristics of the coon stereotype, and then the movie fills in so much of the character's depth and complexity that it breaks the stereotype and creates, a really well-rounded individual.
So by comparison to like another film, like can you think of another character that is the stereotype but not so well fleshed out, just so listeners frame of reference for comparison?
So maybe not in terms of that one, but I'll tell you one that does stand out quite a bit is so the movie The Green Mile, right? Is one of my favorites. Right, it's a wonderful movie. I just watched it the other day. It's great, but from a critical scholar perspective, it's got some problems. In particular, John Coffey, who plays a large, I don't know how would you characterize it? He's got some cognitive disorders, right? He's a very simple man. And he sort of fits into what we call the magical Negro stereotype. Magical Negro stereotype is a variation of the Uncle Tom, which is to say it's a black character that exists for the purpose of helping a white character self-actualize, right?
Okay.
Definitely, because Coffee doesn't really have any use other than to precipitate the miracle, quote unquote, that happens in the film.
Right, exactly. And so an earlier version of this would be like Uncle Remus from Solomon South, right? So the magical Negro is essentially the Uncle Tom who exists to help along the white character, to become sort of self-actualized, and at the same time usually possesses some sort of magical or supernatural abilities. In Black Panther, we see that with Forrest Whitaker's character. Oh man, and what's his name? It escapes me for just at the moment. Anyway,
and of course, because you asked the direct question.
Yeah.
Zuri, right?
Yeah, Zuri. So Zuri sort of functions as an almost magical Negro for T'Challa, because he administers the sacred rites. He administers the heart-shaped herb that T'Challa uses to get his Black Panther abilities. He acts as an advisor. He's there to help T'Challa along. But we also see that this character has regrets. This character has a sense of ownership over the things that he's done wrong and tries to make restitution. This is a character who has his own motivations outside of the primary, right? So that's an example of this support character whose sole existence is to use these otherworldly powers to uplift someone else who in this capacity also has their own motivations, their own concerns, their own vision for how the world should be, kind of thing.
He's kind of T'Challa's Obi-Wan Kenobi.
He really is.
Yeah.
Even especially with what happens in the film. Yeah, I guess that is true. So yeah.
In more ways than maybe I thought when I drew the comparison, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I appreciate about this movie is that so again, going back to Bogle, one of the things that he talks about is how you have this issue, and it's an issue we still see, where you have black characters who are played by black actors, but are written by white writers who don't know the kind of stories they're trying to tell related to the black characters, right? So what you have is essentially not a black character in the film. You have a white person's imagination of a black character in the film, which does not come across as developed and complex and nuanced as could be, and the narrative suffers for it, right? So and so we this movie got away from that. You didn't have that sort of I guess what Bogle calls a variation of blackface. You had actual, I don't know, fleshed out human beings, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and I was surprised.
Right.
Absolutely. This is what made the characters all just so compelling and intriguing. I mean, just more than watchable. I mean, I was just so immersed in this world from start to finish. And my own scholarly orientation is more. I deal with representation, but more in terms of gender than race. And a lot of the things that you're saying also resonate in terms of how the women were represented. Mm-hmm. Film. It wasn't kind of like, oh, isn't that cute? She can beat up that guy. And, there was like a love story, but it didn't the woman was not treated as an object. She had autonomy of her own. She was absolutely as strong as T'Challa ever was. And I'm talking about Nakia here.
Mm-hmm.
She made up her own mind. She could fight. She had wisdom all her own. She had agency all her own. And it was just so refreshing to know that, okay, the lead was in love with her, but the movie wasn't preoccupied with that. It didn't get in the way, and there wasn't any unnecessary sap. She didn't have to give up her identity to participate in that relationship or to have it solidified and made permanent or anything like that. Like, she still got to be herself through the whole thing, and that was just such a blessing to me. And so I'm watching this movie and I'm like going, T'Challa, Nakia, I ship it hard.
Well, and her validation for herself and the only terms that she sets for that exist outside of her love interest, and she's not willing to compromise on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And she is just not defined by the man that she's associated with. And it was just so refreshing. And the same thing with, Shuri. Shuri was Shuri. I mean, yeah, T'Challa was her brother, but her identity through the movie was not T'Challa's sister. Her identity was Shuri.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you continue.
I was just going to say, just as a woman, I found that so very refreshing.
Yeah. Well, I think Ramonda as well, T'Challa's mother, was, Angela Bassett. There's no way she's existing referential of anybody other than herself.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, just the portrayals of the women, in not just as warriors, because we had one of the links that we'll post here is actually a blogger's comparison of the feminism in Black Panther to the feminism in Wonder Woman. And one of the things that I loved about the feminism of Black Panther, one blogger points out, Wonder Woman still suffered from exceptionality. Everything right and good and decent in the world, and she is like a woman that we would all kind of want to be like. But compared to other women, even the women of her own tribe, she is singular, she is the special one, nobody else is like her. And she's going into a man's world trying to change men. Whereas the women in Black Panther, this is just what the woman's experience was. Of course, now I struggle with the direct question, the land where they're from.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Wakanda?
Yeah, Wakanda. Thank you. This is just, the experience of being a woman in Wakanda. You are an equal, period. We have fierce warriors, woman warriors, who are basically like the king guard, who are very formidable. Not in spite of the fact that they're women. It's not because they're women. It's just they are excellent warriors. Shuri is smart, and it's not, oh, isn't that cute? She's smart for a woman. No, she's just a brilliant scientist and inventor. So I was just continuously impressed. They're exceptional compared to the rest of the world, but they're not exceptional for their own society.
Right. Wonder Woman was a champion sent forth to make it in the world of men, but here just all the women are the default setting badass.
Yeah.
Something that stood out to me and Shanna, I'd be interested in from the fan perspective, if you've seen this as well. I've seen quite a few. So, let me back up for a minute. And Janet, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, so I'll explain it for yourself and for any listeners.
Sure.
Part of the primary narrative of the film is that you have Michael B. Jordan's character, who is Eric Killmonger, and he is half African American and half Wakandan, and so there's this tension there between where he belongs and who he belongs to and all that kind of stuff and who his people are, and he asserts that Wakanda has a responsibility to essentially violently overthrow the historical oppressors of Africa. Because he holds, colonial powers as responsible for the African diaspora and the subjugation of African bodies across the world. And, history validates him in that capacity. So I've seen a lot of stuff about, Michael B. Jordan's character, should be celebrated as a sort of, not a hero, but like giving him a lot of credit for like having some real good, having a very accurate assessment of inequalities in the world. But I find that Nakia does not get the same respect, which is strange because in the very first time we see her, she is undercover as a woman being traded or being enslaved by, I don't know, we're led to believe some villains, right? Some like African warlord kind of situation. And so she's been involved in trying to help the world the entire time, but by not murdering people. But she doesn't seem to get the same like fan recognition that I've perceived that Killmonger does, because Killmonger literally says in the movie, we will, I know how the colonizers think. We will use their tactics against them. We will kill them. We will kill their children. We will, burn the world around them. And so that got a lot more, in my very vague understanding, more fan play than like the woman who's like, hey, what if we help people?
Right? Yeah, so that's really interesting. I personally have not encountered that yet, but to be honest, I have not encountered probably as many articles as I could about this, simply because it's sort of a busy time teaching and writing right now. So, I mean, it would definitely be a thing that I would be interested in looking more into. The articles that I've looked at have primarily focused on the feminism. So it is pointed out that, Nakia going out and making the world better by helping people, and she's in the thick of it at the beginning of the movie, is one of the reasons why she is lauded for being a hero in her own right. So I would say definitely from feminist segments of the fandom, she is getting that kind of credit. What I've been reading about Killmonger is that, he a lot of the things that he says about the state of the world and how it got there are correct, but clearly the message of the film is that he's going about it the wrong way. And this has come from articles about things like how his character actually represents the old school toxic masculinity that kind of goes along with colonialism and imperialism and experience of being an American man. So it's kind of what I've seen is this narrative of toxic masculinity versus gentle, thoughtful wisdom, which is T'Challa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'd certainly, I'd agree with that. I mean, Killmonger is, his name is what it is, right? I mean, it tells you everything you didn't know about the character for the most part. Yeah. Something else that I think has that's really captured my attention with this is the way that people have gone about addressing it in terms of. So I've seen a lot of kickback from people who were saying, "Well, people, why weren't people excited about Steel or first of all, no one was excited about Steel, right? The old Shaquille O'Neal movie. No one wanted." Or Blade as like a big superhero movie. It's like, okay, well, first of all, people were excited about Blade. People were really excited about Wesley Snipes playing this character. But what's interesting about this is that and for anyone who's not familiar with the comics, in case you don't know, because a lot of people don't, Black Panther, which was the very first black superhero from let's say primary superhero, because there might have been sidekicks, but primary superhero from either Marvel or DC, right? Came out in 1966. And by the way, 3 months before the Black Panther Party became public.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Huh. Well, yeah, right. And so 3 months later, the Black Panther Party becomes public, and then they continue writing this comic. And so there's some interesting stuff going on there. But he was the first of his type, in the American comic book context. And he is I don't know, like Blade's black, but he doesn't do for the African American imagination what T'Challa does, because I don't know, it was like an aspirational ideal. You also have to understand, and you don't get this from the movie, but T'Challa wasn't just a warrior and a king. He was a scientist. He was like a master scientist. He was a international leader on the world stage. In the comic books, you have a group of people called the Illuminati that are made up of Prince Namor from Atlantis, Xavier from the X-Men, Black Bolt from the Inhumans, Iron Man, and one or two other characters, and T'Challa is one of them. Like, he is given a seat among kings, essentially. So this is not just a black superhero. This is an aspirational ideal that, if we're being honest, has been seen with white superheroes for the longest time. So there's a lot of investment in that, more so than other characters who don't narratively use the same sort of elements or themes.
That's really interesting, because well, number one, I hope that they kind of explore that master scientist background in films. I think that they kind of hint at it a little bit in the film, because all of this technology that Shuri gives him to use, like, obviously he's got to understand it well enough in order to be able to use it effectively. Like all of her gadgets and all that stuff, you couldn't give that to a dummy and expect it to be successful. So I think that there's little hints of it. Plus, with him, those scenes with his father at the point where his father dies and all that kind of stuff, you know that he's doing really smart, important things. But I think that it's like this whole leadership thing kind of made this burner. At least that was kind of like my reading of.
Jen, are you there?
Yeah, are you
Yes,
there?
yeah, we're here. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, it went silent for like the last 2 seconds.
Live podcasting, folks.
It's not a podcast unless something like that happens.
Exactly, something has to go kerflooey. So it's we've had ours.
So I don't know what the last thing you heard was, Gabe.
It's shortly after Master Scientist and the moment with his father.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So, just to me, it read like he was, while he was these things, in terms of being a scientist and all that kind of stuff, just that the science took a back burner to the leadership responsibilities that he had, even while his father was still alive.
Sure.
So I kind of hope they explore that in the future. And speaking of the science, that was like one of the other things that really impressed me with the movie. Like they have this, this sense of deep history and ritual and mysticism, with the ancestral lands and all that stuff. But at the same time, though, science is still very, very privileged, and there isn't this competition between spirituality and science. That tension that we have in our society today isn't there in Black Panther. Like, these two concepts have coexist, and one actually kind of fuels the other, and I thought that was really amazing.
Shanna, do you remember that thing I shared with you about scientists?
Yes.
T'Challa shouldn't have been going around discovering stuff.
Well, we'll have to. You can say, do you want to explain that clip? So, I'll put it up for people.
Yeah. So the basic idea is there's this comedian named Stuart Huff who's a Southern comedian, and he has this great bit about how humans have been killing scientists almost as like a proud tradition. Like we're so invested in. What was the example he said? He said, if you believe that the aurora borealis is magical sprinkles that come from a sky unicorn, and you know that because that's what your mama told you. And then a scientist comes along and says, actually, that's something else, and I have proof. You have one of two choices. You can either humbly acknowledge this new information and change your mind, or kill the scientist.
Yeah.
Really dark.
But yeah,
what was it? The church fueled mob?
Oh yeah, he says there was this preacher who's also a scientist back in there. I was like 1700 or something, and he says, yeah, and he basically discovered that oxygen exists. And he says, but his congregation didn't like that. He says, and a church fueled mob. You get that? You understand how strange that sentence is? A church fueled mob. Did they not read the book?
Only bits of it, only the Cliff Note version, apparently.
Cliff Notes. Yeah.
So yeah, we'll kind of include this with the links about Black Panther, just so that way we can realize this for our listeners a little bit.
Oh yeah. But you're right. They do manage to balance a really good balance between spirituality and science, and neither impedes on the other. And in fact, it seems that there's a fair amount of interplay between the two. So yeah, it does some great stuff. Certainly, it's not a perfect film, but it's as close to one as I'm probably going to see for a very long time. So yeah.
Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you about in terms of the way Black Panther deals with issues of race, and I could be wrong about this, and I have to confess that, surprise, I'm situated in society as a white woman, okay? So there's that coming into play here, but I sort of feel like this film feels effectively in terms of opening those conversations about race simply for the language that they use with it. So, in a lot of movies, you get a lot of, very race language of, black people this, white people that. And I think that particularly for those who aren't used to having those kinds of conversations, it can be a little intimidating and alienating. Whereas in Black Panther, they were kind of calling things what they are and kind of intellectual about it, instead of like, oh, well, this white guy did this, they would refer to that as a colonizer. And so we're using the language of colonization and imperialism. And so I was wondering what you thought about that in terms of the effectiveness of dealing with these conversations about race.
So what's interesting about it is in the way that they address it and the way that they talk about these things, whether that's talked about narratively or talked about linguistically within the film, is that I feel like American audiences, and I don't know how this works across the world, I can only speak to my understanding with American context, is that American audiences, in particular white audiences, often feel uncomfortable about this stuff because there really hasn't been much of a vocabulary developed surrounding race and that sort of thing, like how to talk about it appropriately, if that makes any sense.
Right.
So in this movie, they don't get into much of like white this or white that or anything like that. Although Killmonger does make a lot of references to people who look like us, as he puts in the film, referencing black bodies and that kind of thing across the world. They reference colonization. They reference, and that's a big part of Wakanda. Wakanda is a sort of hypothetical what if. We forget sometimes that as Americans, we forget that the consequences of colonization of Africa by European powers wasn't just the African diaspora and the transatlantic slave trade. It was also the destruction of knowledge. It was also the destruction of holy sites and technological advances and philosophies and wisdom and all kinds of stuff that was lost. It happens to any people that are colonized. And so the mere existence of a African nation that wasn't colonized and is canonically the most advanced in the world is a indictment of colonization in and of itself, right? So it's almost like they don't have to go after, they don't have to demonize white people in any sort of vulgar way, because the mere existence of this idyllic nation is a refutation to all the things that have happened in our history. If that makes any sense. And I think in that capacity becomes more palatable for people who don't have a language for addressing sort of racial prejudices and that kind of thing. It is kind of behind the scenes. Even it's kind of interesting. Martin Freeman was quoted from an interview as saying that he sort of got a taste of what it's like to be a black person on the set because he was one of two white people the entire time. Right? It was him and Andy Serkis, and so he was like, "Oh yeah, no, I get it a little bit, like what it's like." And so that tone being on set, is something that he sort of brought to his acting of being the odd man out a little bit and understanding that. And so you can say these things, you can have these comments on race that are not alienating, that are inviting, and that have the sort of mainstream appeal. And I think that is one of the successes of this film. You do have just the visuals of it, the aesthetic of it, the way that people talk to each other and about each other in ways that are not as stereotypical as perhaps you see in other movies. Allows for enough maybe suspension of ego, right? Yeah, they call Martin Freeman the colonizer, but they're not like demeaning to him at the same time. Does that make any sense?
No, it makes total sense, because as you were describing that, I was just kind of thinking, about like a lot of negativity and fandom in general. And so it's kind of, you get these people who kind of trash on everything, but then there's this other faction of fandom that says, hey, why don't you focus on celebrating the thing that you love instead of trashing on the thing that you hate, because, people who might otherwise be sympathetic to you aren't going to listen because you're being kind of awful about this. So, it's just kind of just the idea of like tailoring your message. I mean, as communication instructors, we deal with this all the time, right? You need to tailor your message to your audience so that it's going to be more likely to be received than less likely to received. And I just kind of really think that the people who made this movie got that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I would agree with that entirely. It sort of reminds me of, I was in, I got into, it wasn't an argument or anything, but on Facebook, I shared this thing. It was referencing Black Panther, and I made a joke, and I'm not the originator of this joke, but the joke is that, saying I saw Black Panther is the new, I voted for Obama for white people. And of course,
no, and I'm laughing because it's so damn true. You're right.
It absolutely is. And for audience members who may not understand the reference, it was pretty common. It's so much so that it became like lampooned in TV, film, and like Get Out references this as well. That there is this certain genre of like the quote unquote good white people who are very liberally minded, open minded and stuff, but still do some racist stuff, But they'll say, "Oh, but I voted for Obama, so I'm not." Anyway, so that's sort of what the joke is referencing, and that's how Black Panther has sort of replaced that, because we haven't had there's no black presidents to vote for lately,
right?
And so
damn
right, orange ones, sure, but not black ones.
Oh,
snap!
But I shouldn't make fun of our Franken-snack in chief. Anyway, so a friend of mine was a white woman who's a friend and colleague of mine from community college. She was a little irritated with me about it, and it was because she didn't understand the joke. And once I explained it to her, she's like, "You know what, I get it." But a lot of that comes from, we get real gun shy with stuff or at least white American audiences get real gun shy with stuff when we start mentioning race. And so I think that once you understand that going into this movie, that race is a part of the texturing of the world and not just a thing to be discussed, right? That you are so immersed in it that like there's not going to be a awkwardly written black person who talks about race on stage, and then everyone sort of like tightens up as soon as he is on stage and then relaxes once he leaves. That the whole film is rooted in blackness, and so you understand that's what you're getting. And while combining that with a mainstream appeal, I think, made it much more palatable for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole I saw Black Panther being the new I voted for Obama. It's all rooted into that whole mentality of maybe the white person who means well but just doesn't understand the thought that maybe, oh well, I can't be a racist because I have a black friend. That kind of thing.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And well, the fact that you're not mean to black people, and that you're open to being friends with them, still doesn't mean that your mouth isn't necessarily going to get you into trouble for things that you don't really understand or have a frame of reference for.
Absolutely, we all say stupid stuff, and the assumption or the idea that partaking in one particular activity makes you or is evidence enough of not being racist is silly. I mean, we all do and say insensitive things from time to time. So.
I and on this related note, I did find an article too that talked about how Black Panther actually creates a model for good allyship. And so for people who are kind of new to the idea of what exactly is an ally and who gets to call themselves an ally would be a person who belongs to the dominant group that actually not only actively likes a non-dominant group, but also does things to kind of help them achieve equality, and without being colonizing or imperialistic. In other words, you're not deciding for them what they need or how to handle it. It's more like you are asking them, what do you need? And then doing that. And so with the character of Ross, what's his name? Martin Freeman's character, you kind of notice, like in the beginning, things are kind of going to hell when he decides he's the boss and he's in charge, right?
Mm-hmm.
But later on, when he wakes up in Wakanda and gets exposed to that world, he actually becomes that person who puts his life on the line for T'Challa and his friends and family. And, he kind of lets Shuri and the others kind of dictate how things are going to go. They decide what they need. I mean, there's even that scene where, he tries to talk, he tries to throw in his 2 cents, and he gets silenced in the most epic and cool way.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that was definitely a metaphor for, hey, white people, maybe you need to just kind of shut up and listen and let people decide for themselves what they need. And then once they decide that, then help them with that.
Yeah. And so that's a wonderful example, like you're referring to with the when Everett Ross is trying to talk. And so what you have is a scene of it's Ramonda and Nakia and Shuri, and they're going to a tribal leader named M'Baku, whose people live in the area, but they're not a part of the Wakandans, although ethnically they are part of the same group. And he tries to put in his 2 cents about what people should do. And Everett Ross, Martin Freeman, is playing a American CIA operative, right? So. And if anyone who's familiar with like international politics, even vaguely, knows that if there is a CIA operative in a foreign country, he may not have the best intentions at heart, right? This could be a potential problem. And so M'Baku looks at him and says, "You do not talk here." And he says, "And if you speak again, I will feed you to my children." And there's a great pause, and then he says, "I'm just kidding. We are vegetarians." And actually, M'Baku is another example of a stereotype that has been sort of subverted and broken, because he is absolutely a buck stereotype, which is a aggressive black male of substantial size that is motivated by base desire. And then he sort of presents that way, and then you find out, no, he's a very intellectual and thoughtful leader who doesn't even eat meat and is concerned about the respect and dignity of other people. But he told Martin Freeman to sit down and shut up, and it was great. And to your point about allyship, we have to. There is and this actually gets to the film a little bit as well, and audiences. there is a perception from white audiences that everything is made for them, right?
Yes.
That the mainstream has been made for them. And to be fair, that has been the practice of Hollywood for the last ever. Right? For as long as there have been movies, they have been geared towards white audiences. And so part of allyship is recognizing that, hey, this ain't about me. It's a suspension of the ego. I sometimes compare it to, like, I'm 6 foot pound. I'm 6 foot, 260 pounds. I'm a big dude. And so if we're at an event or something like a town hall meeting, and I have a friend or a colleague who is a smaller woman who maybe visually doesn't get the same notice that I would, being a big guy, I can use my stature to gain the attention of the person with the microphone, to get the microphone, to hand it to her. Right?
Yes.
That's
exactly.
That's the metaphor that I kind of use.
That's a fantastic example.
Yeah, so it's the use of that sort of privilege that I have of being a large male, and using that for the benefit of other people, and recognizing in that moment that this is about them saying something and not about me putting in my 2 cents before handing it to them. So,
excellent. Yeah. No, I like your I like your metaphor, and I think I'm going to use it when the next time I need to handle one of those teachable moments.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate that. So this movie is fantastic for a number of reasons. And people criticize it, and there's certainly things to be critiqued. I don't know anything about film. I've seen a lot of people say that they had some issues with it from a technical perspective. If I'm being honest, I don't understand. I can be easily entertained by a monkey with a tambourine, right? So. I'm not an expert when it comes to what angles are good and all this, that, and the other. But just generally speaking, I think it's a fantastic, and hopefully sets a point of reference for moving forward with movies that have this kind of diversity.
I'm sure that there are things in there to be critiqued, and I mean, I do work with film. I have a degree in film, but at the same time, though, I think that I'm very okay with being in this place where I am so impressed with everything that this film did right, that number one, it's probably going to take several subsequent viewings for me to find the things to critique and really think about them and not be blinded by the things that I'm impressed with, but also just maybe kind of accepting that whatever flaws it might have are small potatoes in the face of all the other things that it's doing right.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of things that it does right, for anyone who doesn't know, the aesthetic of Wakanda is a creation of synthesizing multiple African tribes and their language. The language is an actual language. I forget what exactly it's called. I think it begins with an X, but it is an actual language. And so when you see, and if you've seen the posters of this or in trailers or whatever, you'll see you'll see T'Challa and then 4 older people and then T'Challa's mother. The 4 older people, they don't use the names of the actual African tribes, but each one's aesthetic is directly influenced by African tribes. I won't say from that region because I don't know that they necessarily match up geographically, but those are actual forms of clothing and that kind of stuff.
I just did a quick Google, and I will add this link to our list of links for this topic. The language is called isiXhosa, ISI, capital XHOSA.
Yeah, that's where the X. Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, we'll put that up there, too, because, again, the person in me who really enjoys language, I do want to read more about this. Now, one thing that I do want to ask you too, Gabe, more from the fandom perspective. We've discussed the film, we've discussed its messages and how it gets that message out. I saw a thing on Facebook not too long ago, and it was kind of like a funny clip of this woman, talking about she was at the store. She's into Marvel. Her kid is into Marvel. Her husband's into Marvel, and so she was going to get this Marvel shirt, and it had the Hulk on the front and the raccoon from Guardians of the Galaxy and Groot, Groot and a few other people, but there was no T'Challa, there was no Black Panther people on this shirt, and there's been a dearth, I guess, maybe of Black Panther stuff. So immediately I'm thinking, okay, so somebody has repeated the Where's Ray debacle, right? Like, did we kind of really miscalculate the popularity and influence of this film and this character? But then that also led me to questions too, like, and so these are some things that maybe people of privilege, people in dominant culture might not know how to navigate. Like, as a white woman, is it okay for me to walk around with my Black Panther t-shirt?
So I'm glad you brought this up, because this has been something that's been on my mind for some time. First of all, in reference to the merchandising, it is a bit strange because they have not invested the time and money they have not invested the ostensible resources required to merchandise this product, this film, as much as other movies. It could be because by this point in the filming or in the progression of the MCU, that they already have enough momentum, they're not terribly worried about it, so there wasn't as much need to push the merchandising as they have with other stuff like Iron Man and Thor and all that, or Captain America. I think part of it too is a matter of exposure. I think a lot of people didn't know who Black Panther was prior to, or at least a lot of mainstream non-nerd audiences didn't know who Black Panther was prior to like this movie. So that's something to be handled. But of course, there's some stuff there that, time will tell. We'll see if any executives are like, oh, we didn't know. I don't think anyone knew that this movie was going to make $500 million inside of like a week or two, right? Domestically.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I'll go along with everything you just said. Like, I mean, I'm a nerd, but again, I don't do the comic books and the superhero films like other people do. I don't dislike them. They're just kind of not my passion.
Yeah. Well,
what got me to go see Black Panther was my former career as a hairdresser. I saw the production stills and I was fascinated by the hair and makeup. That's what got me to go. And now I'm hooked. I'm so glad I saw this movie.
Yeah. So to the other point about, what you can wear and whatnot, I've been having this discussion. I've seen a couple different perspectives. One is that there's people saying that, well, you should not, like for Halloween, you should not dress up as a character from Black Panther if you're a white person or if you're not black. And to that I say, well, okay. First of all, when we're talking about cultural appropriation, there's a bit of irony here, because the people who would say that dressing up as Black Panther or as a character from Black Panther if you're not black are the same people who would have objected or boycotted the creation of this character to begin with, because T'Challa was initially conceptualized by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, two very famous white dudes. Jewish, but passing as white, and it was
me.
Right.
Janet.
So, which is its own superpower, to be fair.
Awesome.
We know Janet has powers.
So you had these two old white dudes who created an African prince and who did it in a very ham-fisted way, and it was not the best representation. And it had time and room to grow over 50 years as it was shaped and rewritten and reshaped and rewritten over and over again by white and black authors. So I would say that cultural appropriation, I don't think necessarily applies here, because we're not talking about an actual culture. The other thing is, this does not survive without white consumerism. Like, Black Panther does not survive without white consumerism. It would not have survived historically without white people picking up these comic books. The movie would not have done as well as it has if it were not for white people buying these tickets and the merchandise and stuff. And so I think it's entirely appropriate to support a black character and what is as close as we're going to get from Disney or Marvel, black entrepreneurship with Ryan Coogler and all that kind of stuff in this film. I think that's okay. The other thing is, I refer back to I was listening to a lecturer here at BGSU who is a comic book expert, and so he was talking about this, and he's a white feller, and he's got a little white son. Son's probably around 6-7 years old, and he bought a Black Panther costume, right? So they're at the mall, and his little white kid is running around in a Black Panther costume, and he and this group of middle-aged black men came up and saw and this is before the movie came out, and saw a little white kid in a Black Panther outfit, and they went up and like, dabbed him with his hand and shook his hand and all that kind of stuff, and were like celebrating this little white boy in a black outfit, in a Black Panther costume. And it was a moment. Now, the kid did not understand what was going on. He was having to meet some new people, but he didn't really get it. But the older black men were like, hey, we have a young white boy here who is celebrating a black character. Right. So we have non-black audiences invested emotionally. And I saw this when I was the first time I went to go see the theater. I was sitting beside this older, I'd say probably 50s, white woman who was like on the edge of her seat, like shaking with anticipation when T'Challa was fighting Killmonger towards the end, right? And active investment in Black lives on the screen, active investment in the narratives of Black folk on the screen, emotional investment. I mean, when T'Challa says to his father, "I'm not ready to be without you," the first time he sees him in the afterlife.
Oh God, I almost cried. I did cry.
I'm saying, like, I was like, how dare you be this emotional? That was, and I got both my parents, but that was still like, oh my goodness.
I'm not crying, you're crying.
I'm not, oh my God, who put all this, where's the trees, all the pollen in this theater?
Onion chopping ninjas.
Right. And so what you have is you have white investment in Black lives, and I think that's important. I think that should be celebrated. And also, I ran it by a couple friends of mine who are both Black men and African American scholars, and comic book scholars at that, and we're like, no, it's cool. You can dress up. So I say that's okay, me personally. Now, all right, if we get some stupid, and I say this because I say stupid in the terms of young people are stupid. Young people do stupid stuff all the time. If we get some like frat white boys that are doing, everyone's dressing up as Himba, the Himba tribe from Black Panther, who are the people who have like the red ochre makeup and stuff. Okay, then we got some problems, right? But if people want to dress up as T'Challa or Shuri or Ramonda or or Zuri or any of these characters or Killmonger, I want to dress up as Killmonger, but I got to get in shape first. I'm not that ripped. So I think that's okay as long as it's not done maliciously. And of course, this should go without saying, but just in case, no blackface.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Yeah.
Oh. So Black Panther t-shirt, yay. But if I show up to work tomorrow with dreadlocks or Zulu knots, we're going to have a conversation.
Yeah, if you show up with like the neck rings, there might be some issues.
Right.
On the other hand, I tell you what, Angela Bassett's hair was impressive. So I don't know.
Yes.
So yeah, no, shirts totally fine. If people want to wear like the Black Panther costume, that's cool. That's whatever. Just also be respectful. And also to this point, I would say that if we're talking about cultural appropriation, how many individuals who believe it will be cultural appropriation but want to dress up as Black Panther for Halloween also worship Bast, who is a real world goddess in some pantheons. So come on.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
There is that. But I was also thinking about this from the perspective of role models, and I saw this thing recently on Facebook. It was a clip of Chadwick Boseman and his coworkers talking about the impact, much of it unexpected, of Black Panther, and he was talking about these two little boys he had interacted with, and I don't know, I shared the clip, Gabe, I don't know if you saw it. He was talking about these two little boys who were terminally ill and were just trying to hang in there until Black Panther came out. The movie meant the world to them. They wanted to see it before they died, and Chadwick Boseman starts crying right there. And I'm thinking about all of it. Like, I just have all of this stuff swimming around in my head about masculinity and representation and the example that he's setting for not just for, children, but for adults too, but particularly children who, they're seeing a wise, sensitive, gentle but strong and very smart leader in the Black Panther character. Like, I mean, he's definitely a hero, but also Chadwick Boseman expressing this kind of emotion in front of an audience, in front of a camera. And both the character and the actor, we see him crying, both in the film and in real life. It's a man is crying, and it's okay. And so, number one, yes, it is very important for Black children to see superheroes who look like them, but I also would argue that it's very important for white people and white children to see Black people and other people of color in the role of superhero, because
Yes.
I think that that's a conversation that we need to have. White supremacy kind of goes away once we accept the fact that somebody of color can and will save the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree 100%. Absolutely. And that is part of my grievance with, and I don't remember if I talked about this last time. I may have. But part of my grievance with like the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show, when they had Roberto Reyes, who is the new Ghost Rider, who's Latino from East LA, and they took away a lot of the stuff that made him a full developed human being that was present in the comics, and they sort of made him into a almost conscious, almost amoral killing machine. They paid some lip service to him being sensitive, but they never really delved into that much with the character, and I feel like did something of a disservice. You're absolutely right. This sort of stuff with Chadwick Boseman, feeling comfortable enough to shed some tears at that interview, and also to do these things, and in the film to represent someone who is who exhibits emotional intelligence, goes a long way towards humanizing humans, which is, anyone who studies media and media effects knows, is a real problem we have. For some reason, we don't humanize other human beings when they don't look like us.
Yeah, and I think just Black Panther, the film, and the actors in the cast, I just really feel like that they, just by being, they've done a lot to maybe establish connections of empathy across races that maybe people hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, I would agree. And they already signed for Black Panther 2 before the release date, so it'll be exciting to see what happens in moving forward with this character.
Yeah, I can't wait. I wait for the next one already. I want it to be tomorrow. All right, so Gabe, anything else that maybe we didn't hit on or talk about before we move on to the next topic? Anything else we should know about Black Panther or race and representation?
Well, just as a closing suggestion, so the currently Black Panther comic book is being written by Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is a sort of social scholar and a social critic who writes for The Atlantic and other sort of publications like that. And so I would strongly recommend reading his run of Black Panther, which I believe is called A Nation Under Our Feet. I will say this, if you do buy it, buy the collected edition, because it does, the way that comics are structured now, it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you just read it issue by issue. You kind of have to read it like a book at this point. So I've read the first 2 volumes. I believe the 3rd volume is out, but I haven't read it yet. Also, or sort of tangentially related. Oh, and Coates is thanked in the credits of the movie, and there are moments where it looks like they are recreating some of the scenes from the comic book. So obviously he played some great influence there.
Nice.
I also heard that he read that he just got signed on to do the new Captain America series. So I'm excited to see what happens there. So check that out. It's good reading. I think other notable authors have been like Christopher Priest and Don McGregor, whose runs I haven't read, but I've read about. So sure, if you're interested in more Black Panther stuff, check those out.
Very cool. Thank you very much for that, Gabe. Are you going to stick with us as we move on to Janet talking about legal stuff?
I would love to, but my throat is really scratchy, and I should probably stop talking before I, and take some medicine or something. So I appreciate y'all having me on your show, though.
We completely understand,
Absolutely.
and thank you very much for giving us your time today.
Yes,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you much. I'll talk to y'all later.
All
Take care.
right. Bye, Gabe.
Bye.
How do I log out of here?
just close out TeamSpeak.
Cool. See y'all later. Bye.
Hey, bye.
User disconnected from your channel.
That was fun.
Yes, absolutely. This is yet another film I need to see. God, I'm so backed up when it comes to popular culture. It's not funny.
So what do you say we dig into legal stuff?
Sure. So, just when you thought that all that sexual harassment stuff was ending, oh no. It's still here. There's so much of it. However, I have a few things that are actually a little bit positive to talk about in this area.
All right. So time for some positivity.
Yeah, exactly. So there were two articles recently about David Schwimmer, who had played Ross on Friends, and Friends is actually getting kind of this this second look from a lot of people, and they're saying, hey, wait a second, there's some stuff that might be a little homophobic or transphobic in there. But be that as it may, Schwimmer, way beyond that, he's actually behind the camera these days. He's doing two things to combat sexual harassment. So he's been stepping up to try to get rid of it, or at least to call it out where it is. So one of the things he's been doing is the hashtag is called That's Harassment. Keep in mind, you can't put an apostrophe into a hashtag, so it's just those two words smushed together. He's producing a number of short films, and they're also creating some public service announcements that are going into taxi cabs. Actually, I think they're just in Chicago, although I'm not sure. But this was reported by the Chicago Tribune a few days ago, and they had one of the short films. These films are like, I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 minutes long, and they showed it in the report, and it's like a little vignette where he's basically playing the boss, and there's a young African American woman who's working with him, and he's complaining that he can't find such and such a file, and she finds it for him, and he thanks her, and and it starts off, it's very professional, he thanks her, and she says, "You're welcome," and then they're working late. It's obviously, it's a bit dark. Other offices are dark. Everything feels above board. And finally, she's starting to push towards, okay, I'm gonna go home now. And he grabs her and he kisses her. That's all he does. Kisses her. She backs off and says, that was inappropriate. I can't, this is wrong. And he actually agrees with her. But then the vignette ends with him insisting on him hugging her in order to apologize, and she's refusing that, and he finally hugs her. So, to bring home the fact that, first off, Schwimmer, my God, if anybody could look more harmless on television, it's hard to find anybody, any grown man on television who looks more harmless than him. So he looks like this nice guy. He's acting like this nice guy up until the moment when he kisses this young woman. He is the nice guy. And then suddenly it turns on a dime. And then the secondary part of it as well, which is where he's ostensibly apologizing to her, but he's using it, and he might not even be doing this consciously, but the character is certainly using it as an excuse to have physical contact.
Yeah, and it's kind of raising awareness for the fact that, sometimes people, and by people I mean men, do things that are kind of creepy that they might not be aware is creepy.
Precisely. And they may even feel that they're being nice about it. And that's basically the way that this comes across in the vignette, is that he sounds genuinely apologetic. You're right, that was inappropriate, but let's hug it out kind of thing. And, it all sounds good on paper. And it's also, unfortunately, it's the sort of thing that if she was testifying against him and they asked her to relate what happened, apart from the activity, if she had to relate what they were saying, for the most part, it would sink her case. Because almost everything that he says, or virtually everything he says, is positive, it's respectful, it's nice. He doesn't sound like a predator at all. But of course, the context is in what we see, and of course, what she's feeling. I'm sorry, please go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, it's just a real powerful 5 or 6 minutes there that they packed a lot into it, and it really makes you think.
I was just going to say that, it's a great point that when you're talking about something, it doesn't always carry the same gravity out of context. So, like, in context, the way a person is looking at you, their body language, even the pacing of the words, the tone of the words, all of that stuff can factor in to make something really, really creepy that might otherwise seem innocuous if you were just reading the words off of a piece of paper with no context.
Precisely. I mean, if somebody is saying to you, it's late, I should really walk you home, on paper, it sounds not only sensitive, it sounds downright helpful. But if this is, but there's a lot of context where that isn't quite so helpful. There's context where that's, where the unspoken implication, the extra part that isn't said is, let me take you home and you should be inviting me in.
Yeah, I mean, we had that discussion over the holidays with the "Baby It's Cold Outside" song, right?
Yes, yes.
It had a lot of social context that a lot of people today aren't taking into consideration, and it's still problematic, but just not for the reasons we would think of today. It's like, no, he's not roofing her drink, but because she didn't live in a sex positive society that would support her for spending the night with this man and giving her the agency to say yes, now we've got all of this distorted verbal tug of war, or this dance that people had to do in order to get to the place that they wanted to be in the first place. So of course it makes it difficult to learn when a no really does mean a no.
Yeah, and this is what I think we've kind of all gotten in trouble with this to one extent or another. And one thing that I think we miss a lot in living in a Western society is that there are a number of societies still existing out there, and I'm thinking of places like India and China in particular, where women are, particularly young women, are pushed into being polite 24/7. That's their be-all and end-all, is to be decorous and polite and, and lovely and quiet and, and deferential. And when someone pursues them who they're not interested in, they can't come out and say, leave me alone. And so they have to sort of hint around, and they keep hinting and hinting and hinting. And the guy's not getting it because the hinting either isn't good enough, or maybe he's sort of a bull in a china shop and he doesn't care, or any number of other things. And then finally, either these women end up acquiescing because they're just sort of stuck, or they end up ratcheting it up to 1,000 and yelling at the guy or telling him horrible things, and and decorum and ratings prevent me from saying the real thing, but they'll unleash a stream of invective on this guy, going completely out of character and out of societal character in order to get him to leave them alone. And then what also happens is that right afterwards, the men come on to among other places a site that I manage where we get a lot of relationship questions, and a lot of those guys come onto the site and then they complain that women have been mean to them.
Yeah, and it's really unreal. And as you were talking about that, I've even thought of situations that I've been in where the guy, like, he's picked up your hint, but because you've been socialized to be polite and not come right out and say what you think, when you leave that room for plausible deniability, then they can proceed as disingenuously oblivious.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, she didn't she didn't say yes, so or rather, I'm sorry, she said nothing, so that means she didn't say no.
Or it wasn't a no, so I get to go ahead. I've been in that situation. I've been in that situation with somebody that I was in a relationship with, and it's creepy as hell.
Yes, indeed.
It's scary. It's really, really scary, and it's that weaponized nice guy thing. It's
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah. So I guess I don't need to explain that, but so I'm glad that it's what Gabe was saying about allyship too. Like, we don't necessarily need men to speak for us, but I have a feeling like with these PSAs, men are talking to other men and saying, hey, you need to get on board with this, and that's male allyship toward women.
Yeah, it's so the whole thing is just it's disturbing, and I'm so glad that Schwimmer has basically thrown his experience and his name behind this. I mean, obviously he's not as uber popular as he was 20 years ago, but he's definitely still got a name, and he's still recognizable to go after this and say, this is wrong and here is why. And the place that they want to put these vignettes, I think, was truly interesting, to put them into like essentially taxi TV, so that somebody's going to the airport or whatnot, and in between the little bits of Good Morning America and banter about the weather, they're also getting this PSA in there. I thought that was a really clever idea.
Or maybe at night when you're supposedly taking the drunk girl home.
Yeah, there's that too. So there's a great opportunity, maybe not necessarily to open up a dialogue, but at least to open up a doubt in the mind of someone who maybe was thinking of taking advantage of that, and say, hey, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Here I am. I'm the nice guy. I'm taking her home. I'm the good guy. I'm doing the good thing. And surface wise, he is doing the good thing. It is a good thing to take somebody home who's incapable of going home. What isn't so nice is when you come in with them and you remove their agency.
Yeah, if you're the good guy in the situation, then yes, you have walked her in. You make sure that she's on the bed, face down, so she doesn't choke in her own puke. And then you leave, and that cab is still waiting there for you because you told it to.
And because this whole operation took only a few minutes. You leave, you shut her door, you're gone, and if you're a really nice person the following day, you call up and find out if she's okay.
Yeah, and if she has pets, make sure that they have food and water before you leave.
Yeah, I realize we keep adding conditions to this, but the bottom line is that what you don't do is strip down and get in bed with her and convince her that she really does want to do this.
Well, but see, here's the thing though, and we do have to put another condition on this, because it's like, okay, you've done all that. Don't expect something in return for that.
Yeah, that's it. It's nice. What heroism is one thing, okay? But you're not a hero when you do the right thing. When you do the right thing that should be expected of you, then you should just do that.
Yeah, like the idea that I would owe you sex for not violating me when I was drunk is kind of creepy.
Yeah, kind of backwards there, and disturbing unto itself. Yeah. I was nice to you when you were unconscious. Yeah. Hey, yay, you awesome. So now you've got to put out for me. That's you were nice to me when I was unconscious because that's what everybody's supposed to do. Don't go patting yourself on the back that you were Superman for doing this.
Yeah, the only thing you should respect in return from me is that I hold your hair when you puke because you drank too much.
Yeah, exactly. I'll be your designated driver, and I really won't take a beer because I'm committed to being sober to drive you home. The other thing that Mr. Schwimmer did, which was also very encouraging, is that he and David Arquette and a few other names who, unfortunately, sorry, I didn't really recognize, they put out an open letter I know it was on page 6, which is where I found it, but I think it was in the Hollywood Reporter, using the hashtag #AskMoreOfHim. And it was an open letter to support survivors of sexual harassment. That they lent their names to this again. And again, these aren't, both of these guys, they're not as popular as they were 2 decades ago, but they're still not just, Joe Smith down the street that they put money into this too, to make it clear that what side they were on, which really should be the only side that anybody's on, that this is happening. We know this has happened. We believe you.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list of names now. I think that a lot of them are from like the writing and producing end of entertainment. There are some actors on the list, but I think most of them are people that, might not necessarily be household names because they wrote the show. Maybe we vaguely remember the name from the credits, but they're not somebody that we've put a face to.
Okay, and but it was still also the fact that didn't seem to have happened before. I thought was a little interesting too. That this was big enough that they were reporting on it. Kind of tells me that maybe not everybody thought that this was something that they should be doing, and I think this is exactly what they should be doing.
Yeah, I think that it's really amazing, and again, I think that this. Kind of a true example of allyship that we were talking about earlier when we were having a Black Panther discussion.
Yes, exactly. Perfect. And yeah, that there was that these guys acknowledged not only that, and also to go back to the whole concept of you took her home, you took her shoes off, and now she doesn't owe you sex. This is it's the same kind of thing that you need that expect more of him, ask more of him. When you take the shoes off and then you close the door afterwards, you're doing the absolute minimum. When I was in high school, you passed with a 65, okay, on an exam. So you're passing with a 65 or 66 when you do that. So yes, you pass. That's awesome. Hey, that's great because there's lots of people who wouldn't. But there's so much room for improvement. There's so many other things that you could be doing here that could make it even better. Just being decent is great. It's important and it's a positive step, but it isn't the only one. And you're not at the end of the line here in terms of things that you can do for somebody and the ways that you can step up and not only support people but also try to turn the tide against harassment that goes on in Hollywood and other places.
It's such a low bar, and let me tell you, if we're putting this in the context of a report card, I mean, I still got in trouble for a 65. You know what I mean? Like,
oh my God, yes.
I passed, but that wasn't great until high school when my mom finally just realized that was the best we were going to get in math. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I know what you mean too.
So it's like, okay, well, I stopped getting in trouble, but like I wouldn't get grounded for the 65 in math. If I got a 65 in English, there was going to be a serious conversation because I was an A student there. Math, I think Mom just finally kind of gave up and just realized that, as long as I pass, I still got stink-eyed, but I didn't get grounded.
Actually, this makes for a good segue because math reminds me of engineering. So, hey, why not? The segue city here. So, engineers in Germany and Switzerland have created a chatbot which asks harassment victims standard questions through what's called the cognitive interview technique. And the cognitive interview technique, all these links are going to be in the show notes, so don't worry about that. It's a type of questioning which is used in criminal investigations in order to assist witnesses with recall. And one of the things that the engineers found was that people who were victims, that there were a number of people who were more comfortable talking to a chatbot than they were talking to a person, probably because I would assume that they felt that they could kind of be themselves and that nobody would be judging them because it's just a bot.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, and that's something that we go through in human subjects research even at the university. Social desirability is a really big thing that can cloud our data, and I think that that's also kind of a factor when it comes to reporting crimes, especially crimes of a deeply personal nature, like you've been sexually assaulted. We've noticed like maybe people are more willing to be honest in an online survey kind of thing where you ask open-ended questions because they're just typing onto a machine and they're not looking an interviewer in the eye, and there's no worry that this person is judging them. And so I think that in the context of this chatbot thing in Switzerland, there's the same thing. The victim isn't going to be judged or shamed by a chatbot.
Exactly. And, the more tools for dealing with these kind of problems, the better. So I thought this was a great use of engineering know-how to try to help deal with this with a societal problem.
And, the thing, too, this even in American culture, it may not, I don't know how common practice it is by law enforcement here, but any fan of the show Criminal Minds sees the cognitive interview, or at least the Hollywood version of a cognitive interview, in almost every episode. It's a really common technique that they use to fight crime in that show.
Cool. So we have other things that are going on. Some are sort of weird, all these little weird offshoots of this stuff. Like I said, this stuff never ends. So there are 2 Colorado lawmakers who recently revealed that they are wearing bulletproof vests because they fear retaliation from supporting sexual harassment accusers against fellow Representative Steve Lebsack. This is Democrat Thornton, which I assume is a town or a small city in Colorado. So the fact that they were fearing retaliation just for supporting victims is pretty damn disturbing.
Oh my gosh, it is. And when people. When people think that, you don't need feminism, or, women are blowing it out of proportion, we're not. Not if our lives are in danger for supporting victims and for whistleblowing and else you can imagine to stick up for ourselves.
Exactly. I mean, and it's troubling that here are people who are one step removed from what had happened, and they're getting grief about it. A recent lawsuit by developer Loretta Lee says that Google failed to stop sexual harassment in their offices. Her allegations include unwanted touching and a colleague who said he wanted to give her a, quote, horizontal hug, end quote. Yes, folks, Google, as in the, biggest search engine ever. Google.
I'm switching to Bing.
I know, tell me about it. Yeah, this is, apparently there's a big frat boy kind of environment there, and unfortunately Miss Lee got caught in the middle of it, and so So now she's suing. There has been a reporting of sexual harassment in the Native American lit community as well.
Yeah, this one really, really bugged me. And I know that it's kind of reached past this, but when I initially became aware of it, there were accusations made against young adult lit author Sherman Alexie, who I saw in person here in Bowling Green about this time last year. And I got to meet him afterward, and so exciting for me. I had taken 2 semesters of Native American Lit at my alma mater and authors, and just to find out that he was part of this was severely disappointing to me.
Yeah, it's and apparently, at least this is from our friend Terry, who works quite a bit with Native American populations. So that unfortunately, there's a sexist undercurrent in a lot of cultures, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, and a lot of that too. Has kind of erupted out of something that we were talking about earlier in terms of imperialism and colonization. You deal with a population that you've systematically tried to wipe out, and when you couldn't, you just kind of kept them down, and the social structures are such that they are economically disadvantaged and socially disadvantaged. You're inviting a lot of social problems in that type of situation. So,
I think that when you sort of you devastate a culture and basically you sort of tear down their mountain and just give them a bunch of anthills. That very often the folks who remain want to be able to say that their anthill is bigger than somebody else's anthill. Did that make any sense?
I think so.
God, I hope so. Thank you. God, I appreciate you. So moving along, this news story, I couldn't quite follow this, to be perfectly honest with you. There's a Texas state senator. Reportedly, he had a sexual relationship with one of his clients, who he also defrauded, and then his wife filed for divorce the day after his conviction. So let me sort of give you a little bit of background on this happy stuff. So the guy's name is Uresti, and he's in San Antonio, and he's an attorney, and I'm sure this is before he was elected to the Texas State Senate. He was representing a woman in her wrongful death suit for the deaths of her 2 children. Okay, and at one point, when they were in an elevator going to either I think it was a deposition. I assume they were both dressed up, and he said to her, "You look particularly sexy today." And this started their sexual relationship. Keep in mind, this is a lawsuit for the deaths of her 2 children. Oh. And apparently that was a big turn on for him. And there is at least one court appearance that they had gone to where they retired to the restroom and a sexual act was performed, which I will not get into. But he was such a delightful guy that not only was he enjoying the pleasures of the flesh with this woman who certainly had issues, but he also persuaded her to invest in something that he knew was a swindle. So he defrauded her, and his conviction was for fraud. And with all the other salacious stuff coming out, his wife decided enough was enough, and she filed for divorce the day after he was convicted.
Oh,
just like, where do you start with that?
Good on you, sister, for getting out.
Yeah, pretty much. Take it for all he's got, honey. So he might be, playing pinochle one of these days with our next subject, who is InfoWars poster boy Alex Jones, who has been accused of, guess what, campers, sexual harassment, also anti-Semitism and racism. Apparently, he would tell a Jewish staff member that, let me see if I can find this, because it's just a delay what he says.
I can't wait.
Okay, so this so the guy's name was Jacobson. He was a video editor for InfoWars for 13 years. So apparently Jones, and he filed a complaint with the EEOC because Jones had frequently singled out his Jewish background and referred to him as a beefcake over the course of 4 years. In addition, because this was a term referencing male porn stars, apparently. In addition, Jones had other names for Mr. Jacobson, which included Resident Jew, the Jewish individual, and Jacobson, and once photoshopped his face onto the body of a Hasidic Jewish man and circulated around the office. In addition, Ashley Beckford, a woman of color, filed another EEOC complaint alleging she was subjected to harassment, racial slurs, and a, quote, hostile, sexually offensive work environment, end quote. She was a production assistant, said she was discriminated against, quote, when it came to my salary, wages, and benefits in regards to my dress, including my hairstyle, end quote. She was also mocked for her skin tone and called a coon by a senior manager, she said in her complaint. She said that Jones once groped her butt and asked, quote, who wouldn't want to have a black wife, end quote. She said in her complaint, I felt embarrassed and nervous, but I knew that he had specifically touched my behind at that moment as a sly come-on that other people may not notice.
Wow.
Yeah, it is. And she added, it's my opinion that it was his intention to see if he could groom me for sexual exploitation. Jones vehemently denied the allegations, calling them, quote, completely, totally false, end quote. Now, keep in mind, this was reported in the New York Daily News. So take from that what you will.
Right. But, I don't know. Too often, though, these stories get reported by places like that, and then the other more, quote, reliable sources start reporting them as true.
Exactly. And what gives me a feeling that there's at least some credence here is that there are filed complaints here. You don't just file an EEOC complaint because you feel like it. You're putting something out there that if it's false, then you've essentially not only have you destroyed your career, but you've committed perjury.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, when you take it all together, it does have some credibility there.
So we'll see if this moves any further. But let's move on to another favorite topic, which is copyright infringement.
Hey.
So I'd like to thank Carlos Pedraza found this, I do believe. So New York federal court judge said that deep linking, which in this case was embedded tweets, it violates copyright. Kind of a weird ruling here. One of the things that Twitter essentially is used for is to bat around all sorts of stuff that goes back and forth and back and forth. You might say something, I might respond to you and quote you. Gabe might quote me or you in turn. So now we've got it, now we're down to a third level, maybe Carlos himself, and then now it's 4, maybe somebody else, and it's 5 and 6 and 7, and these things, they keep going down, sort of like peeling an onion. This is part and parcel of the Twitter experience. And in fact, it's some of the better engagement that you can do on Twitter is this back and forth bantering. And this federal court judge is saying, well, but this stuff should be copyrighted. Will it go any further? No idea. this judge is this is a district court level, so this is the lowest federal level. There is an appeal expected. There usually is an appeal expected when it comes to stuff like this. I doubt that this will continue. If they want to try to bring it to the Supreme Court, if they, either side, if they lose, I have no idea if the Supreme Court would want to grant certiorari to hear such a thing. They might not, because there might not even be a complete understanding of what the judge is talking about. To be perfectly honest, I'm not really understanding what the judge is talking about, because if you and I are just bantering it isn't even any, unless you're giving me something that's truly copyrightable, then, if you're asking me how the weather is, this is not copyrightable. And that's what a lot of tweets are things that are completely, banal. So I don't know where the judge is coming from with this. So
it seems to be kind of related, though, towards some things that I've been noticing in terms of researching methods for fandom studies, and this is something that I had to write extensively about a couple months ago when I wrote my preliminary. And in terms of fandom, there is this I want to say a blurred line between what's private and what isn't, because a lot of fandom takes place in what we assume are public spaces, and so what we've had are academics and journalists pretending to be academics, kind of swooping in and, maybe reproducing tweets or fan fiction or comments on fan fiction out of context and in a way that leaves the people involved feeling violated. So kind of what the trend toward this in terms of research and fandom studies going toward now is that even though this stuff is theoretically out there for public consumption, there's different types of public and there's different types of private. And so either, even though it's technically something that we don't need to get human subjects approval to use to study, we're advised to get permission, or at least to anonymize the hell out of whatever it is that we're using and that we're quoting, so as to kind of protect people's privacy. And so I'm kind of wondering if, in a more legal sense, that's where this judge is coming from. To kind of put a metaphor to it, even though I say something, I post something at an archive of our own, for example. Yes, it's public. Yes, anybody can go and read it, but the audience is clear and intent. And a stranger coming in from the outside doesn't have all the contextual information that they need. And one of the scholars that I was studying likened it to a conversation that was happening at the dinner table of the restaurant. The restaurant is a public place, yes, but what gets said at your table is generally to be understood only.
Well, there's it's also kind of the faces that we show the world. Because I've got a face that's for work. I've got a face that's for writing. I've got a face, in my marriage. I've got a face as for my parents, for my brother, for my nephews, that sort of thing. So we have all these, and everybody's got this. This is not just me. And so when we are taken out of context from some way that we're behaving, which is contextually appropriate in that context, but then it's suddenly not in another one. That sort of misunderstanding. That's I'm babbling. I'm not really making the point very well, but this might also relate back to some of these things that we've been talking about with sexual harassment, where the faces that we show the public are changing and different, and one thing that works in one place doesn't work in another. And when we don't realize that, when we don't shift gears fast enough, I think we get into trouble.
There's that, and I also think in the fandom context, it's also the sense of you think you have more privacy than you actually do, simply for the fact that nobody else is paying attention until somebody or something calls attention to.
Right. Exactly. That
You're hiding in plain sight, and then all of a sudden, what you've done, what you've said, what you've made gets taken completely out of context. You get ripped to shreds for something that requires a little bit more context, or maybe mocked or something of that nature. And in terms of fandom, that has led to lots of marginalization of fans. And so while we're not talking about copyright here necessarily, I do see similarities and overlaps in terms of, okay, who really does have ownership over what I put out there in public, and what do other people have to do with it?
Exactly. And so it's as we go along, I think we're going to keep seeing these things colliding, and this is also kind of happening in the law. The law always takes a while to catch up to technology. So if the judge is using the term copyright infringement, maybe that's because that's the only tool that she's got, and maybe the tool really should be something more like more of a contextual one, that this came from a certain place and maybe it doesn't belong here.
Like maybe a more nuanced understanding of privacy.
Maybe, but speaking of things that are kind of private, probably being pushed out into a really weird place.
Weird is right.
So Reggie Watts, who is Reggie Watts?
You know what? I knew when I first found this story. Reggie Watts. Well, he is.
I'm like looking at the article as we're doing it.
I wanted to say he was a comedian, but we've talked about so many things.
Actually, that's what this article from the AV Club calls him, a comedian musician.
Yeah.
So, oh, I'm sorry. That's what the. Oh, I'm sorry. No. The cat is named after Reggie Watts. The city of Chicago has been rocked by a feud involving an artist from Logan Square named Ray Bees and an animal shelter called Feline Friends. And at the center of the disagreement is a poor little kitty who happens to be named after comedian musician Reggie Watts. Apparently the cat named Reggie is mischievous, has a tendency to run away from home. She did 3 months ago. When somebody found him, took him to a vet, his tracking chip brought up Feline Friends, which is where he was adopted from 5 years ago. Then they refused to return the cat to his owner because they claimed that she broke a contract by allowing the cat to go outside. So what we have here, you can't make this stuff up, folks. There is a custody battle going on for Reggie the cat.
That a celebrity is trying to help with.
Yeah, that's like, what?
Now, the other side of that story is, though, I know that the shelter has looked at Rachel B's Facebook page, and so what they're claiming is that this was not like an isolated my cat's a jerk and he got out kind of situation. Like they claim that she's made Facebook posts that have alluded to letting him out on purpose on multiple occasions. So that's kind of their side of the story, where they're coming from.
Yeah, so stay tuned, folks, because like, what? But it's not to. We're actually going to get into this later, but I did want to point out that it's we here in America, there's more. It's harder to adopt a pet than it is to buy an AR-15 assault rifle.
And that's really screwed up too. I can't even begin to tell you how screwed up that is.
Yes, it is. But so we're actually gonna get to that soon. But you wanna do a little February fandom roundup?
Yeah. So do you want to start with the Whovian feminists?
Sure. So a couple of things have been going on in the Doctor Who fandom. One is that there's been an effort to they raised thousands of dollars to combat gun violence. And Whovian feminism moment came up as sort of a Me Too moment for that fandom.
Yeah. So it was people, actors who were involved with Doctor Who. They had played various companions across the time they were on this panel. So what Star Trek fans will also know, Chase Masterson, she was on the panel. And so they were talking about they had started with a broad conversation about what more can be done to support women in terms of developing careers in the entertainment industry, and then all of a sudden it just kind of morphed into this big Me Too thing when Lindsay Alford started talking about working, and she was a victim of pregnancy discrimination. Then another actor was talking about like how, motherhood was used against her in her career, and then the sexual stories started emerging, and there was just this really powerful Me Too thing that it went from a panel to just a bunch of women talking and sharing their stories and just empathizing with each other, and the audience was very caught up in watching this, and it was just this very, very powerful moment, and not the kind that you normally expect to encounter at a convention.
Exactly, and there's a lot of people on this panel. Actors Sophie Aldred, Lisa Bowerman, Camille Kaduri, Jessica Martin, Chase Masterson, Wendy Padbury, Gemma Redgrave, Dee Sadler. Writers Jenny Colgan, Sarah Dollard, Rona Monroe. Script executive Lindsay Alford, costume designer Haley Neubauer, and director Rachel Talali. So there's lots of names here, lots of people, and to a person, they were talking about either sexism or discrimination or pregnancy discrimination or harassment or even assault in their careers. That it was that pervasive, that it was unanimous that they all had experienced it. This is not a small problem, folks. This is a practically universal one.
And the especially disappointing part of it in this context is, when you're dealing with shows like Doctor Who or with Star Trek that kind of are known for sharing more positive messages and kind of have a message of do better as part of its text, when you find out that this kind of stuff went on behind the scenes, it can really shake a fan up.
Yeah, to know that this is that here's a supportive program and with a supportive culture, and that this was happening behind the scenes, it makes you wonder about the not so supportive environments. It's bad that this was business as usual for everybody, regardless of what was happening in front. What happened in the back was not so nice at all.
So I'm really glad that those fans had the chance to see that. Hopefully this will be one more step into making it better for women in the.
Agreed. So to pull around to some more sexism issues. So when men write fan fiction, it's considered academic, according to the Mary Sue. They were drawing a distinction that I don't think really should exist.
Yeah, so, well, yeah. First of all, statistically, if you look at all of the ethnographies about fandom out there, and particularly the segments of fandom that participate in writing fan fiction, it's generally understood that most fan fiction is produced by women, and what happened here, it's kind of funny that somebody could be this arrogant. It kind of like read like something. If you've seen it on Twitter, the guy in your MFA account. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen that.
So the guy in your MFA is kind of the stereotype that you find in literary Masters of Fine Arts programs, and a friend of ours is actually in an MFA right now. She's taking it online, and all of these MFA programs typically, you almost can't get away from it. It's in almost every single program. You have this one guy who is very misogynistic and very tone deaf. That fact, and so they end up writing like things that they think are really edgy and really important, and really what it is just pornography for your average white straight guy to get his yayas off, So anyway, this guy basically rewrites Stephen King's The Shining without ever actually having read The Shining.
All right, so this is beyond arrogant. Okay, we already know where we're coming from here.
Yeah, and so, but of course he had the book open in his lap the whole time that he wrote it, and so basically he's coming from this position of he's othering fan fiction, like he's saying, oh, it's not fan fiction, it's academic. And I'm just gonna like read you some of the stuff that he's saying. The book is a concerted rejection of the standards of any type of literature, so in that way it is reacting to the formal elements it eschews by interacting with readerly expectations as well as the history of the medium. I guess the reason why this isn't fan fiction is because, first of all, it's not enjoyable in the same way, and then it's vaguely academic.
Anytime the word eschew comes on, happens, you're pretentious pretty much by definition.
Pretty much. I mean, not that like a lot of academics aren't pretentious, and I'm kind of recognizing a lot of the academic gobbledygook that ends up happening. I mean, I don't know how many times I've written a paper, and then when I float it past my professor for some kind of formal submission to either a journal or a conference or anything like that, I get some suggested edits, and by the time I do what they say, it's so convoluted, full of academies that I don't even know what my own paper said.
Yeah, I've seen legal opinions like that where it just goes on and on and on, and strings of $10 words that really don't go along together, and it's kind of intended more for obfuscation than almost anything else.
So here's another feature of like that arrogant male privilege in academic literary circles is all the name dropping. So another quote from what he said: aesthetically speaking, it owes much to Stein, Beckett, Rob Grillett, and Bernhardt. Intellectually, it has a relationship to Barthes, Foucault, Derrida, Debord, and especially Bourdieu.
Okay, this is not Gertrude Stein.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no,
and it's not Dr. Sam Beckett either. Just getting that out there.
So it is having a conversation with different texts in different ways. In other words, you just tossed out every single name of every single literary philosopher out there in an effort to make your work sound more important than what it really is. And so this is problematic, not only just because this is, very typical arrogance that you see in this type of context, but also when you consider that fan fiction readers and writers are probably among the most marginalized of fan communities, probably maybe just above furries, in terms of, how they're regarded as being like just over the top, crossing the boundaries of good behavior and good taste. And a lot of that is misogynistic in nature. It's not a coincidence that we put so little value on fan fiction, and it's regarded as a woman's endeavor.
And gay men as well.
Yes, statistically though, not so much. Let's put it this way: not so many gay men have self-reported reading and writing fan fiction as there have been women of various sexual identities out there. Generally, it's understood to be a woman's thing, but even factoring in that gay men do this, there's the stigmas against gay men that still exist out there today. And they've had a lot of feminized stereotypes to deal with as well. So really, that's born out of the same kind of misogyny.
Yeah, that's basically the point that I'm making, is that, all of this it's a misogyny fest, basically, regardless of who's writing it. That this is that it's all fantasizing for lonely women.
So yeah, so if you ever go for an MFA, beware the guy in your MFA.
Yeah, definitely. So here's a much nicer guy who we have some news about.
I'm so happy to be talking about this guy. So, Mr. Rogers, as in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Fred Rogers. It's the 50th anniversary of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And so a lot of you have probably seen in your social media the story of Fred Rogers going to Congress and basically single-handedly saving PBS when they wanted to slash it down to nothing. It's just legendary. So this month on PBS, there is a retrospective special called It's You I Like, coming to your local PBS station. So since PBS kind of does its own scheduling at the local level, you will have to check your own local listings to see when it's going to be on. But it's just all of these celebrities and people who have appeared on the show, people who worked on the show, just talking about what the show and what Fred Rogers meant to them. And I just about cried watching the trailer for it. I was just so happy and excited for this film. Relatedly, a new biopic about Fred Rogers starring Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers is coming out, and it's called You Are My Friend. There is... Huh?
No, I just said hooray.
Yeah. So there's no release date yet, but I saw the trailer for this last week when I went to go see The Post with my mom, and it just looks phenomenal. I can't wait for it. And finally, Fred Rogers is being commemorated on a forever stamp, and so you can get the Mr. Rogers stamp from your local post office starting on March 23rd.
Awesome. That's very cool. Definitely a hero we should celebrate.
Absolutely. And speaking of heroes and stamps.
Segway City. Awesome.
Segway City. The first woman in space, Sally Ride, is going to be likewise commemorated on a forever stamp, and her Sally Ride stamp comes out April 6th.
Terrific. So we're gonna have a lot of neat stuff coming out in early spring. Sadder news. The other day it was reported that David Ogden Stiers had passed away at age 75 after a battle with bladder cancer. This is reported in Variety, among other places. There had been a MASH retrospective piece that had come out a few days before in the Hollywood Reporter. This is because it was, I believe, the 35th anniversary of the final episode, which was called, what was it called? Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, I believe.
Yeah, and I think even to date, it was like the highest rated primetime TV whatever. Like, it had even outperformed the Super Bowl up to that point. So many people had. And so MASH had such cultural impact, and it's still so beloved by people in the world today.
Yeah. Alan Alda tweeted today. He said, David Ogden Stiers, I remember how you skateboarded to work every day down busy LA streets. How once you glided into stage 9, you were Winchester to your core. How gentle you were, how kind, especially when devising the most vicious practical jokes. We love you, David. Goodbye.
Yeah, and in the article, they do talk about his propensity to be a practical joker, and
Mr. Stiers also had a connection with Star Trek. He was a guest star in the TNG episode Half a Life, where he played one of Loxana Troy's love interest. She was, of course, played by the late Majel Barrett, and a lot of people love that episode. It's a good episode.
Definitely a fan favorite. Also, in fandom news, I believe last month I misspoke and said that I thought The Handmaid's Tale was coming back to Hulu this month, March. It's actually going to be coming back to Hulu April 25th, so we do have a definite date now. And Digital Spy reports that it's coming back with a double bill premiere, and I'm not really sure what they mean by that, so I'm kind of thinking that's a 2-part episode or an extended episode, but they warned that it's going to be even darker than season 1, and they promise.
How's that possible?
I know, right? So I think a lot of it has to do, you know, how they mentioned the colonies, like where when you be a Jezebel and when you weren't really good to be a handmaid anymore, they kind of sent you to the colonies where you worked with like toxic waste and stuff. They talked about it. We didn't really see it. And I think what that's alluding to is that we're going to see it.
Okay. Oh, so now it's going to really dark. Yeah. Dark is not even the word for it.
And the show star Elizabeth Moss says that don't even try to guess what the first episode is going to be about, because it's just so unexpected and unpredictable that nobody will get what it's going to be. She's surprised that nobody will see coming.
Wait, so what happened to Pussy Riot?
So Pussy Riot, and this was kind of an important story to me because I've done research on the band and their fandom. And so what happened was 3 of them were off to Crimea to participate in a protest, and one of the members, Maria, she was one of the members that everybody knows who was put on trial for hooliganism a few years ago, and she and Nadia spent 2 years in jail, and I don't even mean jail, I mean like awful Russian prison.
Yeah.
For a protest that they staged in a cathedral in Moscow. So she was with the other 2 members of Pussy Riot, and she got detained separately from them. And when she was released, by that time, she lost track of the other 2. And apparently, their cell phones and their laptops got destroyed. So by the police. So they had no way of contacting anybody to let them know that they were okay. So apparently, they got detained couple of times in Crimea, and there was really no rationale given for that. They were also taken to some kind of medical complex for, quote, examinations that nobody's really disclosed the full nature of. Yeah, so eventually they re-emerged, and the band's Twitter account did make a statement that they've been found and that they're okay and that they were detained and all this stuff happened. But there's just like a lot of weirdness and unanswered questions, and I kind of find that it's a lot of the language being used to talk about this incident is saying, is phrasing it as Pussy Riot claims that members are missing. And so it's kind of meant to like deflect credibility in that way. But at the same time, through the research that I did on the members who were sent to prison before, and what the political climate was like. It's a political climate in which activists and journalists who expose corruption kind of show up dead pretty soon. And people do disappear and that kind of thing. So, just please educate yourself and read through that kind of language, because I think that this report has a lot more credibility than what the headline is trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. And for the folks who think that getting in bed with Vladimir Putin is a fine and fun kind of silly thing, it's not. There's a lot more there that's pretty scary. So
yeah.
We're gonna do a whiplash shift, mainly because we've been talking for a while. But we're gonna shift over to one of the biggest news stories that's going on right now. It's really not a fandom story, but it absolutely is about speaking truth to power, which is the Never Again movement, which has risen out of the school shooting at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, where kids of ages like 16, 17, and 18 basically called out their NRA-loving Congress people and said, "Enough already. This is absurd."
Yeah, and I have never failed to be impressed by how articulate and poised and passionate these students have been when dealing with this issue, be it in interviews, be it in in public speaking situations at rallies, and just basically in general. So, number one, that's definitely a credit to their education, and number two, they seem to be quite supported by their teachers and their parents. So I just want to say good on you, adults in their lives, for supporting them that way.
And other support that we have seen, one piece of support is that there is a list going on, the USA Today reported this, of colleges that are perfectly fine with high schoolers who might be getting suspended if they leave class for Never Again protests. There are some Ivy League schools on that list, I might add. Other support that I have seen running across Twitter. Unfortunately, I do not have the links for this, but I have seen messages of support coming from such people as Harry Styles from One Direction, from Justin Bieber, from Kim Kardashian. So we're talking about people with millions of Twitter followers, millions, folks, who are putting out messages of support and saying, "Enough, never again." Support this movement, and and giving it a bit of even more of a positive lift. So no matter how fluffy Kim Kardashian and Justin Bieber, etc., are in a lot of ways, I thought that this was a really nice thing that they were using their fame and their and their voice and their reach in a way that was positive, and so awesome. Good on them.
Absolutely.
We also saw some calling out privilege. Want to talk about that?
Yeah. So, do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to talk about that?
I have to open it up and look at. Oh yeah, now I found this guy. So this was a cinematographer. This was a comment on February 2nd. He had received an award. This is an older white gentleman, and man, I'm missing on his name, but I don't want to start the. Obviously, I don't want to start the.
Alan Caso or Caso.
Thank you. Awesome, because I didn't want the video to play because you would have heard it. Anyway, so he gets this cinematography award, and he immediately says, "Thanks, I appreciate this, but I want to open up doors in Hollywood for people who don't look like me." and that he used, and similarly, this is a use of a platform. You've got an audience, you've got the cameras on you, you've got the mics on you, and he's talking to the world and saying, yeah, this is lovely and I appreciate it, but there's all these other people out there who are not being given a chance to be a part of this industry and this artistic endeavor, and we need to be working to make it so that they're not rare in this industry anymore.
Yeah, I thought that was a really classy move on his part, and again, it's how to be a good ally.
Exactly, because God knows he didn't have to say any of that stuff. He could have just said, "Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you to my wife, my agent, and God in that order or whatever," and could have been done with it. And instead, he used the platform for good. So that's so kudos. So and then we saw tardigrades.
Tardigrades. So this is something that Star Trek Discovery fans are very, very familiar with. And there's been a video circulating about why tardigrades are awesome. I found this on Facebook not too long ago. Janet, do you want to talk about that? You want me to talk about that?
I'll pull it up while you talk about that.
Okay, so basically, a tardigrade is a microscopic creature. It's also called, I believe, a water bear. They are microscopic, and what's special about them is that you can boil them, you can freeze them, you can put them in the vacuum of space. They can survive just about any place. And so they've even put them on space missions to see if they can survive exposure to vacuum, and apparently they can. And they have been around forever. It's probably one of the most ancient microorganisms on our planet. They found fossils from over 500 million years. Just a wonder of science.
Yeah, they're really amazing, and so this was a video that was posted by Hashem Al-Ghali, who has got this wonderful science page on Facebook, and if you don't follow him, I would suggest it, because it just these wonderful little stories that are, they're kind of bite-sized, so they're easy, they won't take a lot of time out of your life, but they're fascinating, and they feel accurate, or at least as up-to-date accurate as it can be. And one of the, you were saying you could boil them, you can freeze them, it's just, I suddenly got that moment of thinking of Samwise Gamgee in Lord of the Rings, just talking about explaining potatoes to Gollum and saying, boil them and mash them, stick them in a stew. And that's pretty much what you can do with tardigrade. They're a lot smaller than a potato, by the way. So the other thing about tardigrades is that they don't have what we would consider a basic body shape or type, which also belies just how old they really are and how far up on the family tree they are, because we're used to seeing usually we would see creatures that would have four limbs. We almost always see creatures with four limbs once we get past the spider and once we get past the arachnid and insect stage. Virtually everything's got four limbs, or at least is supposed to. You got and because even dolphins, where the back limb is fused, that actually started off as two legs. So we're used to seeing that body plan, and instead what you've got here is there's 6 legs, and then there's kind of this sort of wacky tail. But the other thing about them is that our body types, and this also includes insects, is that we've got sensory organs in our heads. We've got ears, we've got eyes, we've got noses and whatnot. And the tardigrade doesn't have that. The tardigrade actually has something. It's I don't even know what the heck this is called, but it's a very different look to it. It looks so unworldly that you have to wonder if they even come from this planet, because they look so incredibly different from what we do.
They're also kind of cute.
they're cute in kind of a weird headless way, I suppose. And the representation that was on Star Trek Discovery is a good one, but it's not an ideal one, because the one that was shown on Discovery it almost gave the creature a snout, and actually that it doesn't really look so much like a snout. That part that's sort of the this rounded part, I think it's a mouth, but I don't really know. That's actually more recessed into the animal's forefront.
I think part of it too was that for Discovery, because we didn't really know what it was yet, and because it had that storyline where the accident happened on the other ship and it killed Klingons and all that kind of stuff, that I think that the difference might have been just to make it look more terrifying, and Burnham was able to understand what it really was.
Yeah, exactly. And they were referring to it as a tardigrade, but because this is something that was millions of times larger than a real tardigrade, this is like seeing predatory creatures on some other planet who work in packs that you might refer to as sort of space wolves. They're not wolves, but that they act in that fashion. So we're using a familiar term to relate it back to the things that we know.
Well, they even called it Ripper.
Yeah, exactly. And that they called it Ripper, and it also had claws, which they sort of have, but they sort of don't. I mean, keep in mind, this is something that is smaller than your pinky fingernail.
Way smaller.
Way smaller.
But they're cool, they're cute, so we'll post a link to the video for you, so check it out if you haven't already seen it.
Definitely. Tardigrades rule. So, are we cool?
I think we're done.
I think we are. We've talked about many things. It's been an eclectic kind of a show.
It really has, but then we've had eclectic things happening, so I guess that's okay. But yeah, so it was so much fun to have Gabe back on the show. I hope to have him on again sometime in the future. It was really good to have our very first returning guest.
Awesome, and I'd like to announce that I can't add I can't count, because this is actually show number 16, and I said it was show number 15. So our show is old enough to drive.
Wow. Should we have a party for it?
I don't know, but I'm a little afraid to give it a license. But we did find the Shenanigan Mobile.
Yes, we did. Oh my god, and it was beautiful.
It was a VW microbus that had been kind of tricked out like the Batmobile.
Yeah, it was like if Batman were a hippie. Yeah, cool.
Exactly. It's probably exactly what you're imagining.
Or worse, I don't know.
It could be that too. So anyway, thank you so much for listening, and we'll try to get back in a month, approximately, somehow.
Somehow, some way, same shenanigan time, same shenanigan channel.
But it's regularly every few weeks, sort of. We don't really know. Yeah. highly organized here.
It's part of our charm.
Clearly. All right. So thanks so much for listening, and we will see you in a month, approximately.
All right. Peace out.
Bye.
Music provided by Infocationary. Send mail to hosts@semanticshenanigans.com. Follow us on Twitter at 2shenanigans. That's the number, not the word. 2shenanigans. On Facebook, you can find us at Semantic Shenanigans. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Semantic Shenanigans. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on Semantic Shenanigans.